Fishing in fall is one of my favorite times of the year to fish. Not only is it a good opportunity to catch a lot of fish, it's also a good opportunity to catch trophy fish, but it does come with its own challenges. With the fall time, we get a lot of these king tides that come in. We get a lot of this wind. So what happens is we're dealing with high water, we're dealing with dirty water, and we're dealing with all this wind. So in this situation, what I like to do is I like to change up the styles of lures that I like to use. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for something that's a little bit bigger profile, something that puts off more flash, more vibration, something that's really going to be able to get the attention of those fish with all of this going on. So in this video, we're going to talk about the styles of lures that I like to use in the fall time. I'm going to show you how I like to work them, and we're going to talk a little bit about the equipment that I'm throwing them on. So the first type of lure that I'm going to be throwing is going to be a topwater. And I know a lot of people throw topwater year round, not just in the fall, but typically in the fall time, I like to go up in size. I like to go with something a little bit larger that makes a little bit more noise, something that is going to stand out amongst all of that noise that's out there with the wind and the bait and everything. You got to draw that attention of the fish to your lure. So going a little bit larger. Now, whenever the wind isn't up, say you get out there, it's a fairly calm morning, or you're dealing it with an afternoon and there's not that much wind, then going with a standard topwater. This is a moonwalker. It's about a 3.5, 3 3/4, right around there, what I call a standard size. This is a good starting point whenever the winds are down, but whenever you're dealing with high winds, that's when I'm going to go up. So something like the Rapala Skitterwalk and the size 11, this is the bigger one. And the reason why I like this one, bigger profile, it's going to be able to put out, more noise, more vibration, more, flash if you're using a flashy type of paint, and it's got a really loud rattle in it. So you're going to be able to call those fish out. Anything that's going to be out there, you're going to be able to draw that attention over the waves and over all that bait and just the general noise that's out there. So going to a larger profile is the way to go. Now, one thing that I do like doing whenever it comes to dirty water is I like using brighter colors, maybe something that's got a little bit of flash to it. And again, the reason why is we're trying to get those fish to see our lure, and especially if there's a lot of bait around there, we need something that's going to stand out a little bit. So when you get into your silvers, you get into your chromes, even a white color, something like this moonwalker that's got a little foil, a little flash on it, like using that whenever that water gets dirty. Again, you're trying to get that attention of the fish. Now, the situations I like throwing topwater is going to be whenever I see surface activity, whether that be feeding activity, you're seeing bait chase, or you're seeing wakes, you're seeing pushes, you're just seeing the fish are higher up in that water column. If I'm not seeing that, then I'm going to switch to something subsurface. But typically in the morning time, what I like to do is I like to start out with the topwater and then work the area, see if there's anything interested in it. If I'm not seeing any of that activity that I like seeing, then I'm definitely going to go something subsurface. Now, as far as the equipment that I'm going to be using with topwater, I like using a 7'6" medium power fast action. That's for my standard sizes, my 3.5 to 4 inch. Your bigger topwater lures, like say that Skitterwalk in the 11 size, or even a head and one knocker spook, those are bigger lures. I like throwing on a little bit heavier rod. So a medium heavy is going to be something that I'm going to use on that one. I'm going to typically use a 30-pound leader, and it doesn't have to be very long. A short leader is all you need. But typically your standard all-purpose type of equipment is what I like to use. And that's what I like calling these 7.5-foot medium power fast action rods. It's pretty much the work truck of fishing rods. They're going to do a lot of things well. Okay, so here is some tips I want to give you when it comes to working your topwater lure, your walk the dog lure. A lot of people, this is the big mistake that I see a lot of people doing, is they have one speed. They'll walk the lure just like this. They'll walk it just at this speed, and they don't change things up. That's a huge mistake. One thing I want you to do is vary up your speed, especially if you don't know what they want. If you're seeing some feeding activity out there, some surface wakes, some pushes, some chasing some bait, and you're not getting any bites on your topwater, that doesn't necessarily mean that your topwater is not the right one. What I want you to do before you start switching things out is I want you to change up your retrieve. So we're going to go ahead and throw that out there. I showed you a standard retrieve. That's kind of what everybody else does, when they get out on the water. There's also a very slow retrieve, so you just give it a pop, let it sit for 3 or 4 seconds, give it another pop, let it sit for 3 or 4 seconds, give it another pop. So we're working it really, really slow. And this oftentimes is a retrieve that will get the bite when nothing else will. You have to remember, what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic an injured baitfish. And injured baitfish typically don't go scurrying across the surface. So something like this looks like an easier meal. So if you've got a fish that is shy and they don't really want to chase after anything, giving it a small, slow retrieve like this, a subtle retrieve like this, often turns them on. Now, sometimes what you have to do is you have to irritate them into biting. So that's when what we do is called burning the flats. We're just go really fast across the surface. So we've got, a retrieve that really doesn't stop. You know, it just keeps going. You're covering a lot of ground, you're moving a lot of water, you're really making a lot of noise with this lure. So something like that can work also. And again, you're going to have to change up your retrieves. Another thing that you might want to do, this happens a lot, especially if you get fish that are following your lure and they're not committing, throw some pauses in there. So let's say we're working our lure, stop it, let it sit and let it rest. Oftentimes that little pause right there will trigger the instinct, that predatory instinct of these fish, and it'll get them to bite. So give it a couple more twitches, then let it pause, let it sit there, give it a couple more twitches, and then sometimes what you can do is actually do a straight reel and then let it pause, because that straight reel looks like it's trying to flee away, and again, that is going to trigger that predatory instinct. So biggest thing with your topwater lures is vary up your retrieve. Put some pauses in there, speed it up, slow it down, and let the fish tell you what they want. Oftentimes they just get dialed in to a certain type of retrieve. Now the next type of lure that I like using is going to be a paddle tail. Again, this is one of these lures that you're going to use year round a lot of times, but in the fall time I like using larger ones. So typically I'm going to be using at least a 4-inch, if not a 5-inch, and my color selection is going to be a little bit different when it comes to this dirty water. Typically I like something that's got some more flash to it. So if the water is clear, I like going with those natural colors. So I'm going with some greens, or I'm going with maybe white, something like that, something that doesn't have a whole lot of flash on it, something that might be, you know, darker on the top, lighter on the bottom, you know, kind of mimics that bait fish. But in dirty water I need it to stand out a little bit more. So something that's got a lot of flake on it, like this is our gold digger right here. That's a black lure that's got a lot of gold flake. We also have an Alabama leprechaun, which is our green color that's got a lot of flake in it. Those are colors that I like using because of that flash. In this dirty water, it's going to be able to grab what little light there is and flash it back to the fish and get their attention. Now the situation I like to throw these paddle tails in is, again, if we're out there on the water, we get out there first thing in the morning, they're not hitting anything on top water, you're not really seeing any activity, then I like to go subsurface. I like to throw these paddle tails. And one great thing about a paddle tail is you can work them a bunch of different ways. So you can kind of match the mood of the fish. So if they are at the bottom, but they're still maybe feeding a little bit aggressively, you can work that lure quicker. Or if they're just lethargic, they're not really moving at all, then you can work it really, really slow right on the bottom. Paddle tails are a universal lure. They work a lot of different times. Now the rigging is going to be dependent on what I want to do with the lure. If I want to work it faster, a lot of times I'm going to put a heavier jig head on it, maybe a 1/4 ounce, something like that. And the reason why is I can work it faster and still keep it near the bottom where I think these fish are going to be at. Now if I want to work that lure slower, I'll actually put a lighter weight on it. It forces me to slow down to keep that lure down at the bottom where the strike zone is. Now the equipment that I'm using with the paddle tails, I like using spinning equipment. I'm going to use a 7.5 foot medium power fast action. I can use a 2000 or 2500 size reel. Typically I'm going to use either maybe 8 or 10 pound braided line. And in this dirtier water, I'm not really worried about a light leader. So 20 or maybe even 30 pound leader, especially if there's snook in your area, is going to work great with the paddle tails. Now here's how I like to retrieve my paddle tails. So typically, you know, again, there really is no wrong way. You want to vary it up just like you want to do with your top waters, but throw it out there and let it sit. A lot of mistakes that people do is they'll actually throw it out there and then, you know, they'll start reeling in right away, but let it sit. Oftentimes that splash might get the attention of the fish. And then what I typically do as a default is I'll do a slow reel, something about like this. I want to keep it right on the bottom, and then I can feel that lure touching the bottom. It'll grab every once in a while, and that way I know, you know, that if I'm wanting to throw a paddle tail, typically I'm going to be fishing towards the bottom. So what I want to do is want to make sure that lure is down at the bottom where I think these fish are going to be. Now sometimes I'll do what's called a moderate retrieve, where I'm actually just skimming it right above the bottom of the water. This is something that I'm going to do when I'm trying to cover more ground, but I still want to fish towards the bottom. So the speed is going to be something about this right in here. And this is actually one of those ones, like I said, if I don't know where the fish are, if I'm not seeing a whole lot of fishing activity, or a lot of feeding activity, I should say, not seeing a whole lot of bait, I'm just trying to cover ground, this is about what I'm doing. I'm going to be casting to my structure wherever I think these fish might hold up, and I'm just going to do that moderate retrieve. Now here's another option, and this is oftentimes when I'm fishing with a jig head, I'm going to do a retrieve like this. So I'm actually just going to do a twitch, and then I'm going to reel that line down, kind of keep semi tight to it, and then I'm going to put a pause in there, another couple of twitches, do that same thing. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just jerking that lure right across the bottom. It's going to hop up, it's going to flutter down, it's going to hop up, it's going to flutter down. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to vary up the degree of my twitches, how hard I'm going to be twitching that lure and how long these pauses are, depending on the mood of the fish. And again, that's something that I'm going to vary up until I find what they want. Sometimes they want a really aggressive twitch, and then sometimes they'll want just something subtle like that. So again, that's something that you want to, vary up and see what the fish want at that particular moment. And it could change from day to day. It could change from hour to hour. So you're always changing up your retrieve. Now, before we go to the next lure choices, there is one thing I want to remind you of, and that is no matter how good your lure choice is, if you're not fishing where the fish are, you're not going to catch anything. And if you're struggling with that, we can help you out at saltstrong.com. With our system that includes our Smart Fishing Spots app, our community of over 60,000 helpful members, and we have a complete lineup of equipment that's specifically designed to catch inshore fish. No matter where you are in your fishing journey, whether you're a beginning angler or even an advanced angler, we can help you catch more fish. So if this sounds interesting to you, make sure and check us out at saltstrong.com. Now, this next one is something that you might not have thought about using in inshore, and that is going to be your hairpin style spinnerbaits. Yeah, the same style that we've been using for bass fishing for a long time. These actually work great inshore, especially under these conditions where we're talking about we've got that dirty water where we've got high wind. These work great because they put out a lot of flash, they put out a lot of vibration, and the fish can find them from a long ways away. Redfish absolutely love these lures. So if you haven't tried a spinnerbait for red fishing in the fall time, it's absolutely an outstanding setup. Now, the setup on the spinnerbait that I like is I like using that gold with the Colorado blade. That's that teardrop blade. I'll use a 1/4 ounce jig head and usually a 4 or a 5-inch paddle tail. Honestly, the same paddle tails that I'm using when I'm just using a regular jig head. I like using those colors that have a lot of flash, something that's a little bit larger that's going to put off some vibration. So between that flash and the vibration of that blade, and then the flash and the vibration of the actual paddle tail that's on the lure, this is designed to make a lot of noise and call fish in. They can find this from a long ways away, and it doesn't matter how choppy it is out there, doesn't matter how much bait is out there, they're going to be able to find this lure. Now, you could buy these spinnerbaits already put together. Strike King makes the redfish magic, but honestly, I like using the H&H. It's basically, they're just going to sell you the spinner blade with the arm itself, and then you could put your own jig head and your own trailer on it. And that way, I've got plenty of that. I can switch these out as I needed. They're easy, they're cheap, and it's something that everybody should have in their tackle box, especially if you like catching redfish. As far as the equipment that I use when it comes to the spinnerbaits, I like using bait casters. So anything that has a lot of drag, a lot of resistance that's coming through the water, whether that be a spinnerbait, whether that be a bladed bait like a chatterbait, maybe even a crankbait, something like that, I like using bait casting. It just works better with those high drag type of lures. Now, I'm going to use something that's got a little bit more give to it, maybe a slower fast action or maybe even a moderate fast action. And the reason why is when you're pulling something through the water column and the fish is biting at it, if you've got something that's too stiff, if you've got something that doesn't have enough give on it, a lot of times you're going to miss that hook set. They're not going to be able to grab that lure really well. So something that you're constantly pulling through that water column, that you're not having to work, you're not having to put a cadence to it if you're just straight reeling it in, something that's got a little bit slower tip to it. Now, not all manufacturers are rated the same way, so if you've got a rod that's a little bit softer, it really doesn't matter what the rating is on it. I just like using something that's got plenty of backbone on it, but might have a little bit softer of a tip. Now, as far as the line that I'm using, I like using a lighter line with my bait casters. I'm trying to get as much casting distance as possible. So this is 15 pound. I'm using a really round line. I'm using the Daiwa J-Braid Grand, the 8 strand, and there's no dig in issues with the 15 pound. A lot of people think that you're gonna have issues with the line digging in, but you really don't if you use a round line. If you're using a 4 strand, you're gonna have some digging issues, but with an 8 strand, you typically don't. As far as the leader, I'm using a 30 pound leader material because when you're dealing with something that's making a lot of flash, a lot of vibration, you're dealing with this dirty water, you really don't have to go with a light leader. So a heavier leader, even a 30 pound leader, is going to be perfectly fine. You're not going to have any issues, and it doesn't have to be long, maybe 12 inches. Now, here's how I throw the spinnerbait. Now, this one here, it's pretty much, it's a straight up retrieve. I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. I'm going to let it sink to the bottom because I'm not fishing very deep. It doesn't take that long. And then I'm just going to do a straight retrieve, just like this. And if you look, you can see the rod tip right there. You can see it bouncing. The slight vibration, that's that blade bouncing that rod tip. And then every once in a while you get a little bigger pull. That is the spinnerbait grabbing the bottom. And that's exactly where I want to be. I want it to be on the bottom because if I'm throwing a spinnerbait, then I think the fish are going to be lower in that water column. And this is going to cover a lot of that water column because it puts off so much flash and vibration. It's not like I've got a finesse situation where I got to put it right in their face. This is going to be something that they're going to be able to find. So it's basically just a straight cast and a straight retrieve. Now, sometimes what happens is people will put twitches in them. They'll put some, you know, a little extra pops, something like that. I typically don't do that, but feel free if you think that's going to help the bite out. If you want to change things up, go ahead and do that. But for me, it's typically just a straight wind out and straight retrieve. Another great option for lure choice this time of year is going to be the spoon, whether it be the classic spoon, the Johnson Silver Minnow, or some other brand. They just absolutely work great. And the reason why, they put off a lot of flash, they put off a lot of vibration. They're mimicking the size of the bait fish that the fish are already feeding on, and you can control that depth wherever you want it. If you want to work it higher in the water column, you just reel it in faster. If you want to bump it on the bottom, you just slow it down. You can work basically the upper, the middle, and the lower water column just with a spoon. And it casts absolutely fantastic in the wind. It's so aerodynamic. If you're in a situation where you have to cast into the wind, something like this just goes a lot better than anything else that you'll try. Even a paddle tail, that can actually grab the wind, kind of slow things down. This just cuts right through it, and it does a great job at catching fish, and it works anywhere. Redfish like them, trout like them, snook like them, just about anything will eat this. Now, as far as the equipment that I like using with spoons, again, I like using something that's got maybe a little bit softer of a tip, because when you're constantly reeling that lure through the water column and the fish goes to grab at it, you want it to be a little bit softer so it has a little bit of give so this fish can hold on to it. You'll get a lot better hookups that way. Because there's not a lot of drag when it comes through the water column, using spinning gear is actually my preferred setup. Using that 7'6" medium power fast action, maybe something that's got a little bit softer of a tip, that is going to be what I'm going to use. And the same type of setup, I'm going to use either 8 or 10 pound mainline, but I will go up to 30 pound on my leader. And the reason why, again, we're dealing with dirty water, I'm not really too worried about stealth, and the fact that this lure has a lot of flash and vibration, so it's not one of those stealthy type of situations where you need to have the thinnest, the clearest type of leader material. Now, if I was fishing clear water, if I was fishing a finesse presentation, yes, I'm definitely going to go down, but for this stuff, 20 to 30 pound leader works perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to your spoon, basically it's kind of the same thing as that spinnerbait. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it out there. As you can tell, that thing just, it doesn't take much effort to get it out there. There's not much wind resistance, and it just flat out sails. But basically, I'm just going to do a straight retrieve. You know, I'm going to start out with maybe a moderate retrieve, something about like this. That way I'm going, you know, right above the bottom of the water, you know, right off the bottom. And a lot of times, again, if I'm fishing a spoon, then I think these fish are going to be a bit lower in that water column. So I'm going to get it closer to that. Now, what you can do is you actually can pick it up, go a little bit faster, or you can even slow it down to where you're just bumping the bottom. You can see the rod tip bump the bottom right there. And, you know, again, there's no wrong way of working a spoon, but this is the most common ones. It's basically a straight retrieve where you're just going to vary the speed and figure out what the fish want. Now, I will give you an optional retrieve that some people will do. Now, this isn't very common, but some people do this, and it does work. And that is actually doing a twitch like you would the paddle tails that we were talking about. So twitch it up off the bottom, let it rest, and then just repeat that process. The aggressiveness of your twitches and the length of your pauses, that all can vary depending on what the fish want. But something like this works really good, because when you're pulling that spoon off the bottom, it flutters and it flashes and it puts off a lot of vibration. And then by letting it flutter back down to the bottom and letting it rest there, it gives the fish time to find it. Now, this could be a really deadly presentation, especially when we're dealing with this dirty water. So here's the lineup again. First thing is going to be your topwater lure. And the windier it is, the bigger, noisier lure that I like to throw. If it's calm out there, I'm going to go with your standard size, your 3.5 to 4 inch, right around there. But if it's windy, if there's a lot of bait out there, something that you need to stand out, then I'm going to go to that larger topwater lure. The next one's going to be the paddle tail. And again, like using larger ones this time of year. So the 4 inch or the 5 inch, and I'm using colors that have a lot of flash in them because of that dirty water. I want them to be able to catch that light and attract that fish. So larger paddle tails that have a lot of flash. After that, there's going to be the spinnerbait. The spinnerbait is one of those ones that really is going to stand out amongst the crowd. It's going to make a lot of noise. It's going to have a lot of flash. It's going to have a lot of vibration, and the fish are really going to be able to single that lure out amongst all of that noise and amongst all of that bait. And it is a flat out redfish killer. And the last one's going to be the spoon. That one works everywhere. It works in freshwater, works in saltwater. But the great thing about it is there's no wrong way of fishing that lure. You can fish it fast. You can fish it slow. Just match it to the mood of the fish, and you're going to catch just about anything on it. So hopefully this clears things up. If you have been dealing with a situation and you didn't know what direction to go with, where you are dealing with that high water, where you are dealing with the dirty water, and all those winds, and no matter what you're trying is not working, try one of these lures and I bet your luck's going to change. Now, I know that there is a lot of experience levels that watch these videos, and if you have a favorite lure that you like using in these tough conditions, put them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. As always, I really do appreciate you watching the video. I hope your next trip out on the water is a great one. Bye.